Hey. That concludes our public forum, and we'll now move into our meeting processes. And I must start by the opening prayer. We could all stand, thanks. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. Recording and webcast of this meeting. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting, and the audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Okay, conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I've received a conflict of interest declaration from Mr Finlayson, and it's in relation to the confidential item, the organisational review, and his action is he will leave the chamber. I have no other conflict of interest declarations. Mr Zaknich, disclosure of political donations.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The advice of the council meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contributions plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zaknich. Apologies, CM4. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following recommendation that Council receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Alice Glacken and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM5, there is no Merrill minute. CM6, action plan 6.1 to 6.4. Councillor Cameron, your light's on?
I don't.
Don't want it? Your elbow must have been. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1. Actions complete for noting only. 2. Actions awaiting response from external parties. 3. Actions in progress. And 4. Long-term issues, in brackets, more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to that motion?
I think I've already said enough.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Confirmations of minutes from the previous council meeting, 8th of July 2019. Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 8th July 2019 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to that at all?
I do not.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no reports from community forums. Notices of motion CM9. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council 1 investigate options, including comparison to other councils in our region, for a permanent fixed position to both improve disability access and inclusion in Albury and liaise with people in our community with a disability and service providers. And 2, that the outcome of this investigation be reported to Council no later than the 28th of October 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Con, I have a question. Did you wish to take the question before you open debate? Councillor Vanderman, question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager. What advice was given to Councillor Con in relation to this matter prior to the notice of motion being included in the agenda?
Mr Sacknage.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. Advice was provided to Councillor Con indicating the current state of around resourcing in terms of implementation of the Council's recently adopted Disability Inclusion Action Plan, and a discussion encouraged between the community members this evening that were initially raised the issue through Councillor Con to myself.
You follow up, Mr Mayor?
Yep.
I thought we'd had this discussion before around notices of motion that we'd sort of agreed amongst ourselves to provide some feedback or some options or some reasoning by way of email to councillors. Again, this doesn't appear to have happened in this case. Could Councillor Con explain why we weren't given any advance notice of this apart from this notice of motion in the papers today?
Councillor Con.
Yeah, happy to. It's because this motion's just asking for further information. It's not asking us to take a decision tonight. It's not asking us to provide any funding. The assumption is that this would be a non-controversial motion and that investigation that's reported back to Council, hopefully no later than the 28th of October, would provide really comprehensive information based on which we could make a decision.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Con, just open debate. Or is that your debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll only speak briefly because we've already heard from one of the community members tonight that approached me to talk about this. I did firstly want to acknowledge the hard work of our Community Development Officer who does outstanding work with limited resources. As I've just said, this is simply a request for further information and I'm hoping that on that basis it will be supported unanimously by my fellow councillors. It's been brought to my attention that it's perceived by some disability advocates and members of the community who work for disability service providers that other councils do this better than us. And I think that forces us to ask the question about what the other approaches are, whether that's something available to us, whether funding streams are available, and whether our current resourcing approach is really the best option. So this is really just opening the conversation and starting the discussion about how we resource this position. I think a fair argument has been made about the benefits of having a dedicated position rather than having a portion of time of a general position like Community Development Officer allocated to this. And I'm hoping that we can have a really robust discussion about this once we've got that further information. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. Councillor Thurley, you speak for.
Very briefly, it is an issue that's come to us on numerous occasions in numerous ways. Vision impaired people, we had the policy about things out at the front of shops in Dean Street and any other street. We've had issues about traffic crossing accesses with people in wheelchairs. So I think it's, rather than handle each one of these things as a one-off complaint, a one-off problem, a proper investigation of all of the issues. And if this points to the fact that we need to have a dedicated officer in council, then so be it. But the first step is to get all the information from all the disability groups and from all the relevant people in Albury. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Vandervan.
Through you, Mr Mayor, to a relevant member of staff. What do the state government and federal governments provide by way of overarching policies in relation to this, and do they provide any funding for these sorts of positions?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor Vandervan. I'm not aware of the detail, but certainly I would expect us to be able to document and include that in the investigation report that Councillor Cons requested. Certainly it will need to be a consideration. And, you know, I know there are states that do this particularly well in terms of government funding programs. Whether or not we have access to the same funding as our neighbours, for example, in Wodonga, I'm not sure, but certainly we'll explore that and we'll include that in the report to you.
No further question or debate. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
Look, only briefly, Mr Mayor, I thank Councillor Thurley for his support. We really need to make sure that the facilities and the events and the services that we provide to the Albury community are available to everyone, and that we do that the best we can, and that's all this motion's about. Thanks.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM10, presentations, deputations. There are none. CM11, 11.1 minutes of the Murray-Darling Association Region 1 meeting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Murray-Darling Association Region 1 meeting held on Friday the 24th of May 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
We had a guest speaker from the Murray Lower Darling Rivers Indigenous Nations, and he spoke to the meeting about cultural flows and the importance of water to Indigenous people. While it's not a big issue in this area, it's an enormous issue at the moment on the Barwon-Darling system. They have almost, well, basically no water in the Barwon. So he explained what they were working towards, and it was important that at least this region has heard that.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 11.2, the minutes of the Sports Albury Advisory Committee meeting. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes, recommendations of the Sports Albury Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 5th of June 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday, 2nd July 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No questions or debate. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13, Officers' Reports for Consideration. CM 13.1, the Mungabarina Aboriginal Place Management Plan. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A endorse the draft Mungabarina Aboriginal Place Management Plan. B, commence the public exhibition process as outlined in the report for not less than 28 days, with submissions permitted to be received for 42 days. And C, if no submissions are received, that the final draft Mungabarina Aboriginal Place Management Plan be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Very happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Condon, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Only briefly, this draft plan reflects 3 years of consultation that was done by our staff and the consultants that were involved in the survey. It's obviously an area that there's a lot of community interest, both from the Aboriginal community and from the rest of the Albury community that use that place. There's a lot of fantastic ideas about how that can be preserved and utilised in a respectful way that maintains cultural values. So I'm really excited that we finally got a management plan that's been endorsed by all of those parties, and this is a really important step so that some of those works can go ahead. So very excited to support that plan tonight.
Thank you. I did speak at the NAIDOC luncheon about the Mungabarina management plan, and I really hope that there's a big opportunity for this community, and certainly for us as a regional leader, to make a big statement in relation to our Indigenous culture. And I think this particular landholding is quite underrated and certainly damaged unnecessarily by four-wheel drivers and people who don't respect the purpose of the land. But I only hope we can get adequate funding after this plan is approved to realise the dream and to realise the importance of the culture. So thanks, Steve, for the report, and I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Did you vote then? Yeah, we're all carried. Thank you. CM 13.2, Two Cities, One Community Action Plan, 6-monthly progress update, June 30th, 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron, you ask a question, you put in the motion.
I'd like to ask a question, Mr Mayor.
I'll get the motion put. Councillor Vandervan?
Happy to move that council endorse the Two Cities, One Community Action Plan report.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Stutchbury?
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Just a question first. Councillor Vandervan, you comfortable with that? Councillor Cameron?
Through you to the most appropriate member of staff, is there any signs of Wodonga City Council having reconsidered their recalcitrance in refusing to participate in the Consultative Aquatics Committee that's been set up?
Mr Zagnich?
No reconsideration at this stage, through you, Mr Mayor.
Are you comfortable with that? No.
No, I'm not comfortable with it at all, Mr Mayor. I'm very disappointed.
Okay.
Very disappointed.
Did you have another question?
No, I'll sit here and ponder.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan?
Did we have a... Yeah, we had a second. No, look...
Yeah, we've had a second.
Yeah, I don't wish to open debate on this. I think it's just a basic... we're just noting the report and endorsing it. So, look, it's one of these things. It's reporting on our current action plan and what's been achieved and what we're hoping to achieve in the next 6 months. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Just one note that I see that there is a lot of progress being made, and it's encouraging to see that a lot of the items have been actioned or in the process of being actioned. And hopefully once we bed the regional city deal down, we'll be able to start create a lot more momentum on this particular project. It's very important. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We are up to 13.3, development application 10.2017.352361 Murray Park Estate. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move an alternate motion to the recommendation, and I apologise to our administrative staff for anything that through 5 minutes ago. I move that Council 1 receive and note the contents of the report, 2 defer determination of development application 10.2017.35236.1 for stages 7 to 10 of Murray Park Estate, comprising 109 residential lots at lot 542 DP 1229895 Riverboat Drive and part lot DP 124039428 Stockyard Way, Thurgoona, until after the provision of the following information. A, the Sloane Stormwater Design Assessment Sheet previously provided by Council be completed and returned to OEH. B, designs of basins A and B be revised to clearly show functional details of all water management structures such as valves and outlets. Basin A is to include impermeable cell walls, including structures for water management between cells. C, the proponent be required to demonstrate how the current hydrological regime to lot 3 of 4 will be maintained, including diffuse overland flow. 3, development application 10.2017.35236.1 be reported back to Council for determination following receipt of the above information.
That's certainly a mouthful. Seconder, thanks. Councillor King.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor King, for your second. Yes, I would. This is a very large subdivision that's happening in a sensitive environmental area. The development application was originally submitted to us 2 years ago, and it's been an incredibly long process of trying to get the developer to submit the required information. And I understand from talking to staff that this wasn't a delay at the AlburyCity end. It's very clear from the report that this developer has not yet met the requirements of OEH. And the report details that we need more detailed plans about mitigating environmental impact, erosion and sediment control practices. In previous stages of this development, there's been unapproved stockpiling and an unapproved basin on parts of this site. And 2 breaches of development consent. I'm quite concerned that we've reached a point where we'll approve this development so that work can start and wait for things to be addressed through conditions that might be breached. I think that we really need to insist that the information we requested be provided to us before we approve the application. And assuming that that information can be provided and that it's satisfactory to both our officers and OEH, then I'd be happy to go ahead with it. But it's my opinion that there's enough information missing here that we need to insist on that information being provided rather than letting this go through with only part of the information. I did want to commend the staff for having negotiated some positive changes to the original application, and part of that was the retention of some significant trees and a change to the basin design. But again, we and OEH set these requirements for a reason. I think we need to adhere to our own rules and processes and insist that information be provided rather than letting it go ahead and relying on conditions that may not be adhered to. And it's an issue that I've raised before, that I don't believe we have adequate resourcing in our compliance department at the moment to actually have a look at all of these large subdivisions. So I really think those plans need to be in place before we start. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. Speaker again. So I have 3 questions. Councillor Cameron, do you happy for me to take the questions, or did you wish to speak?
No, I have the questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Christie. Presumably, the question is, are these issues relating to stormwater design and the basins a part of the consent conditions which we would impose if we pass this, approve this development tonight? And would they then become part of the normal process of the developer having to comply with consent conditions?
Mr. Christie.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, they are proposed. These components form part of condition A5 in detached recommended conditions of consent, and they do require this information to be provided to Council and approved by Council and OEH prior to the issue of a construction certificate, which means they have to be endorsed and approved by Council prior to any works commencing on site. Obviously, in the second part of your question, in regards to then they would form part of their conditions of consent, and if they don't comply with what they propose to provide in those plans, then that would be an enforcement issue in regards to not complying with those plans.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Thurley? Happy with that? Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to the relevant member of staff through you. Would the deferment of this particular development application decision make any difference to the availability of compliance staff members?
Mr. Christie.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in regards to the impact and the impost on Council's compliance team is related to the activity that's actually occurring on site. So deferral or approval of this would not necessarily make any difference in regards to the impost on our compliance team. It would be compliance with the condition requirements, and whether the development was being undertaken in accordance with the consent that would have the greatest impact.
Follow-up?
I actually didn't ask about the imposition. I asked about the number of staff available for compliance. Is this going to make any difference? One of the reasons for moving this particular motion was around the fact that we don't have enough compliance staff. So deferring this motion, is that going to make any difference to the availability of our compliance staff?
Mr. Christie. Mr. Ferris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, as we work through our organisational review, we have identified that our environmental and compliance areas need a review, like a number of our areas, with regards to resources. So there'll be no immediate changes, but as I say, in the near future, we'll review our resources across the board and determine if we have the right level of resources for each of the activities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchby, question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. In regard to this Sloan's stormwater design assessment sheet, according to Councillor Con's amended motion, this information has been requested but has not been completed and returned to the Office of Environment and Heritage. So if that's the case, then why has this DA been put up for discussion on tonight's agenda if the application process wasn't complete?
Mr Christie.
Free, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. In regards to Sloan's Froglet design and the design guidelines, which have been provided by ONH and Council is being used for a number of years in regards to development, they require certain things provided up front prior to a development application being approved. And then there's required further in regards to functional and detailed design for further information to be provided at later stages. So this is one of those pieces of information that, under those guidelines, could be provided either upfront or with the functional and detailed design plans, which come post the consent being issued, but prior to any works commencing on site.
Follow?
No, I'm still trying to understand the answer. So, no, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you speak against the motion.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against this motion, and I foreshadow that if, and hopefully when it is unsuccessful, I'll move the original recommendation as a new motion. It seems to me that every time there's something on the agenda for Goona, that there seems to be some real or imagined impediment to proceeding. There is, of course, a small cadre of people in our community who seem to aspire to have Goona declared some sort of national park or no-go zone for development where nothing can happen. The reality is that Goona is a very important, indeed vital part of this city's development and future corridor for housing and homes. Goona remains a very, very central part of this city's growth. It is not on the agenda to hold up development indefinitely over trivialities and imagined or the slightest pretext. And to move a motion like this on the alleged logic that people may not comply with the development conditions is to do a disservice to our staff, particularly our enforcement staff and our planning staff. It would be a triumph of poor governance to adopt a position that said we're not going to approve any developments because we don't know whether people will comply with the regulations and the legal requirements that the Act and the Council puts on them in approving developments. That's just nonsensical. If that's the case, we might as well pack up and go home. I urge you to vote against this motion, and I urge you to vote when I put it, the original recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. No speakers for, of a speaker against. Councillor Vanderman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity. Just the same, from my perspective, putting this motion up the way it is because there's some issues around the fact that we might not have sufficient compliance people to monitor things. Well, that's been, if that's the case, it's obviously been a situation that we've had for some time, as explained by Mr Ferris, that we're doing a review of our compliance team situation. If we need more compliance officers, well, that proposal will come to Council at some future stage. But to block this development application on the basis of the fact that the assumption that Councillor Cameras has already elucidated, and then the fact that we mightn't have enough compliance people to oversee these developers, beggars belief. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury speaking against.
Hey, Mr Mayor, echoing the previous two speakers, I've been out and had a look at this pretty bare, desolate paddock that doesn't seem to have much relationship to any national park that I've ever been to. I think it requires development. It's in Goona. It's part of our growth corridor. And, the developer's been asked to do a few things, and the developer will do those things according to the DA that we vote on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. No speakers for. Another speaker against. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak against it for one particular reason. The information here will have to be provided before a construction certificate is issued. The person might hold the DA and the approved consent in his hand, but he can do nothing unless he has a construction certificate, and he won't get it until these conditions are adhered to. So I see no reason to vote for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There are no further speakers for or against or questions. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I will, despite noting that I'm obviously going to lose this motion. I think my reasons for moving this version have been misconstrued by the speakers against. I didn't make these conditions up. Obviously, given the wording of them, I'm not a town planner. These were requirements that we asked the developer to provide, and they had 2 years to provide since it was originally given in 2017. The developer was asked to provide this information and elected not to for 2 years. All I'm asking is that we actually adhere by our own processes and actually require that information to be provided so that we can make a decision based on the full information. If we revert to the original motion, I'm going to have to be put in the very uncomfortable position of voting against the development, not because I don't think it should go ahead, but because we don't have all the information. And all I'm asking is that we're able to make a decision based on complete information. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I'll put the motion in the form of division. Those for the motion? Councillor Con, Councillor King. Those against the motion? Councillor Stuttery, Councillor Doxy, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vanderman. The motion is lost. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report. Grant development consent to development application 10.2019.36739.1 for the deferred development of 4 attached industrial buildings, 1 ancillary office, ancillary car parking.
Wrong one.
Oh, well, all right then.
Take two. Take two.
All right, I'll start again if that's all right.
Yes.
I wonder what one was on the board. So CM 13.3.
Yeah.
Thank you.
13.3.
All right. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B grant development consent to development application 10.2017.35236.1 for stages 7 to 10 of the Murray Park Estate subdivision, comprising 109 residential lots at lot 547 DP 122-908-905 Riverboat Drive and part lot 2 DP 1240394 number 28 Stockyard Way with Laguna, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 4.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to open debate on that motion?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak for that motion?
Just to repeat what I said before, that granting consent tonight does not give the developer the right to go ahead unless he provides this information. He will have a consent in his hand, but he will not have a construction certificate issued. And I would imagine that after the debate and the time period of 2 years that elapsed, our staff will be particularly vigilant in assessing and looking at what happens in this development. Nothing can be done until he has a construction certificate.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to reconsider closing the debate?
I'm sorry, do I wish to reconsider?
We opened the debate. Did you wish to close the debate?
Yes, but there's no reconsideration,
No.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
You're
Did
welcome.
you close or did you want to close?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Putting the motions to division. All those for? Councillor Thurley, Councillor Doxy, Councillor Cameron, Councillor King, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vanderman. Those against, Councillor Mack and Councillor Con. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 13.4, Development Application 10.2019.36739.1, 284 Shoeback Street, East Albury. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron, do you wish to put this motion?
Well, I'm just making sure, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stusbury. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant development consent to development application 10.2019.36739.1 for the deferred development of 4 attached industrial buildings, 1 ancillary office, ancillary car parking and a 5-lot community title subdivision at proposed lot 9 Ruby Court, approved under development application 10.2017.35240.1, currently addressed as 284 Shuack Street, East Albury, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 4.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, I have a question from Councillor King. You happy to take the question?
Yes.
Councillor King, question.
I have a question, Mr Mayor, through you. In section 7.2 of contributions, it says that the cost of this development is $462,565.40 for being for 4 multi-purpose industrial warehouses and 5 community lots. The relevant member of staff checked those figures against the standard that they assess the developer contributions.
Mr Christie.
Thank you for the question for you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we did assess those against what we use as a cost guide, and they were very close to what we use as a cost guide.
Thank you. Councillor King, any follow-up?
Sounds very cheap, but no further questions.
Thank you. So, Councillor Stutchbury, you wish to speak before we open your debate on this motion? Thanks.
No.
Speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
Mr Mayor, I don't so much want to speak against it as propose an addendum, if I may, if it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder. And the addendum would simply be C, that the General Manager ensure that a further report on the practicality and desirability of issuing bonds in development development consents be examined by Council. So I'm hoping for a further report on the practicality and or desirability of the practice that we asked the question about earlier tonight, of potentially asking that bonds be.
Yeah, I'm just a bit not confused, but this is not relevant to this particular DA. If you wish to raise an urgent business item, I'm happy to take that item then. Councillor Cameron.
Well, I think it is relevant to this DA. We've had people who live adjacent to this evening to the proposed development raise the very issue of bonds.
So did you want, but for the purpose of this DA, did you want a bond, consideration of bond to be executed on this particular?
No, I do not. What I ask for is a further report come to Council about the practicality and or desirability of the practice of instituting bonds on development applications, which, as we heard tonight from our staff, isn't currently our practice, nor do we have an established policy on it. But to enable us potentially to do that in the future, I think it would be good to have a report for Council's consideration, given the events of tonight and the presentation we received earlier.
Okay, Councillor Stutchbury.
I'd happily second that as a notice of motion for the future or urgent business tonight, but it's not relevant to this particular DA.
Councillor Doxey.
I agree also. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, well, I won't press the issue, Mr Mayor, and I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Councillor Con, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, please. Back to the issue of compliance with conditions of development consent. The Speaker tonight raised the issue of dust suppression on the construction of the initial subdivision on this site, and I'd like to know what our response to that has been and will be moving forward, please.
Mr Christie.
Thank you for the question for you, Mr Mayor. Our precise response, if it's okay with you, I'd have to take on notice so I can get a copy of our precise response, because we did receive that for a custom request, and I can send an email out to all councillors providing that answer.
Thank you, Mr Christie. There being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
It's closed.
Happy to put the motion in the form of division, councillors. All those for, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor King, Councillor Thurl and Councillor Vanderman. Those against, Councillor Con. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. we have CM 13.5, development application 688 Drome Street, East Albury. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant development consent to development application 10.2019.36840.1 for a vehicle repair station with associated parts, sales, offices and amenities, car parking, signage, hard stand and landscaping at Lot 2 in DP 1241205, addressed as 688 Drome Street, East Albury, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 3.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to open debate on the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to note that this is reasonably straightforward. Obviously, it's come to council because of the size of the development proposed as far as the cost is concerned, and it's good to see people still quite happily investing in Albury with these sorts of facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to speak for?
Well, only briefly, because of the contrast with the other two days we've had tonight. This is an entirely appropriate location for commercial development for the city. I'm happy to support it, and I particularly note that this developer will be keeping all of the trees present on that site and still building an odour barn. So development applications can be appropriate and done well, and I'm happy to support them when that's the case.
Thank you. Being no further question or debate, Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mayor, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.1, the monthly development statistics for June 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron.
I move that council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for June 2019.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.2, investment balances for June 2019. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move that council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of June 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions, Councillor Van. You happy if you take them?
Thank you.
Councillor Con, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff, please. I note with some interest in the report that AlburyCity's received $524,993 from the class action against Standard & Poor during the GFC, and that this debt was previously written off. There isn't any detail in this report about where that money is now going to go, which projects this is going to fund, or whether it's going to be made available for new initiatives, and I'm hoping the staff can address that, please.
Mr Finlayson.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. With respect to the funds received, it's proposed that how they're applied be taken into account as part of the September quarter budget review. We're currently going through our year-end process for the last financial year to work out the relative ups and downs compared to budget, and that's to be reported to council. That'll also be combined with what the projections are for this new financial year, which will also take into consideration matters such as the council's investment into upgrading street lighting to LED, as well as budget savings that need to be found during the new financial year for the general fund to achieve a break-even result. So it's proposed that all that be brought into the one space for consideration by council regarding what to do next.
Councillor Con, do you have a follow-up?
No, I look forward to reading all of that in the budget review.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, look, obviously it's quite interesting that this amount of money has now become available, and I was just wondering whether it's possible for a council to work out at some stage how much money we've finished up losing out of this whole debacle, and then sending a bill to the New South Wales Office of State Revenue for the balance, seeing that they quite happily approved us, every council, investing in CDAs at the time. I would like to, at the same time, note that I'd like to put forward, perhaps as part of this motion, that one of the interesting things with our investment balance is that the rate of return on these investment balances is reducing all the time, obviously because of the current climate, with interest rates reducing quite significantly over the last month or so even. And what it does is brings into focus all of those projects that are on our energy action plan, where the payback period is such that prior to today, those projects were not able to be justified on the basis of their payback period. But understanding that even now, with the current interest rate climate, that a project that has a 20-year payback period, which means that we're basically getting a 5% return on our investment, would now become an optional investment for council funds to get these projects underway. So I was wondering, as part of this this report, whether we could ask staff to produce a report that shows what other projects in our energy action plan, which we prioritise in terms of the payback periods, whether some of those could be started as an alternative to our investment in outside investment vehicles, and use it to for the betterment of our community.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. So ideally, Councillor Vanderman, we could include that information in the aforementioned September budget review, where things like the LED investment is included, but the energy savings action plan projects that could be brought forward as a result for council to consider, we could do it at that time if that suits.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, there being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.3, the Waste Diversion Program, Electronic Waste. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move an amended motion. I move that Council does not receive and does not note the update on the disposal of electronic waste in our region.
Does not receive and does not note. Councillor King.
I'll second that to see where this is going.
Councillor Stutchbury, we're all ears.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor King, for that most generous seconding of this motion. Look, I had no intention of amending this motion, but truly, this whole issue started with a complete mistaken press release that was issued without permission and then had to be retracted. And now it's produced this 3-page report, which I've read a number of times, and I cannot glean a single gem of useful information from this report. It talks repeatedly about Victorian legislation and makes a few motherhood statements about whether we should, think about doing the same thing, and perhaps we should be careful with what we throw out and blah, blah, blah. But really, it's a waste of time report. Wasted my time reading it once, wasted my time reading it twice, probably wasting my time moving this motion, but it's just, I don't even know why it's on the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker against. Councillor Thurley, you turned your light. Okay. Thank you. There are no more speakers for or against your motion or any alternative motion, or so. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak against it to foreshadow an alternative motion should this be defeated.
Thank you. Did you want to close debate?
No.
Thank you. Just as an aside on this particular report, Councillor Stutchbury, I thought it was interesting that we have actually negotiated with the electronic waste collector to take the small items, which they would ordinarily take larger items from the landfill, because we do have 3 Victorian regional councils that fall under the auspice of the legislation that we're talking about. So I didn't find it a complete waste of time. But anyway, I'm happy to. All those in favour of the motion? Those against? The motion is lost. Councillor Vandervan.
I'm happy to move the council receives and notes the update on the disposal of electoral waste in our region report.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Councillor Con.
Thank you. Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. No further question or debate. I've put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.4, the Albury-Wodonga Visitor Economy Trends 2018. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move the council receive and note the Albury-Wodonga Visitor Economy Trends 2018 report.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, I have a question. You have me to take the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. I've noticed in the report there's a significant decline of 2.5% in the overnight visitors, which by my calculation is a decline of $4,073,625, and that visitor nights has decreased by 8%, which has given us a decline of $21,375,000. Could the relevant member of staff please give me the strategy in place to address that very, very, very significant decline in visitors to this region?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question. The Tourism Research Australia data is based on a relatively small sample. So whilst when you calculate it out as a whole, certainly it can appear as a significant impact, but these are trends only. We have a comprehensive destination management plan in place to continue to grow tourism. We have a very solid marketing plan in place and a partnership with Wodonga, and both of those things, certainly over time, we expect we'll continue to see trends improve.
Councillor King, you have a follow-up?
Yes, I have. You've quoted where you get your data from, but I'm getting the inference that it's not quite that accurate. Is that correct?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, certainly, Councillor King, it's not accurate data, but it is a trend analysis, and this is the only data that is nationally available, that is comparable region by region and city by city. So at this point in time, this is the best data we can rely on, and it really is the only data we can rely on.
Follow-up, Councillor King.
Follow-up. Okay, so the international visitors allegedly spend $60 a night, yet our domestic visitors spend $171. Can you explain the disparity between those figures?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's a whole range of reasons why that variation might exist. The specifics I can't explain. Again, it's a Tourism Research Australia data set. But, you know, arguably that could be because a lot of the international visitors that might be travelling through the region are here on a backpacking basis and doing work. So they're certainly not going to be staying in a 4.5-star hotel like someone who might be visiting for holiday and leisure purposes. So all of those things are taken into account when Tourism Research Australia does the survey in questioning the international visitors. So they will be asking them what is their average spend a day, and that's what the information's based on.
Councillor King.
This report is delivered to us yearly. Okay, would you think it might be a bit more pertinent to have this a little bit more frequently, given the significant amount of income being lost in those downward trends?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we would love to be able to provide you with the report more regularly, but the data set is only released annually by Tourism Research Australia. So we can only provide it to you when the data's actually available.
Councillor Thurley.
Question through you, Mr Mayor, to Ms Squire, I presume. Do we get data through our local chamber and our local hotels?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we certainly collect data at the Visitor Information Centre. So we monitor the number of visitors that are coming through the centre, we monitor visitors to our website, we monitor the telephone inquiries that we receive. We do rely on ABS data with regard to room occupancy, but it's only available for hotels that are 15 rooms or more. And we also liaise with our local accommodation tourism partners, some of which are more willing to provide data and information than others, because there is a commercial element to that information which we respect. But certainly the data that is available, we source as best we can.
Councillor Vanderman, question.
Before I open debate, I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Just that raw number there of $812 million, what was last year's raw number in the same report? Because I don't have it immediately to hand.
Ms Squire, can you recall that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, not off the top of my head, but it was only nominally less from memory, but I'm happy to circulate that after the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, just open debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to actually focus on the positives of this particular report rather than the negatives, and all of the highlights from my perspective are the fact that we did get $812 million into our Albury-Wodonga economy, that we did have 1.065 million day visitors, that we did have so many night visitor trips and so many international visitors visiting, and we had a 24% increase in the number of people using the Visit Albury-Wodonga both as a walk-in and as a online inquiry. So from my perspective, I think if you look at the tourism market in Australia overall, I think we're doing okay, even to hold our own or just to slightly improve on last year's figures. So I think from my perspective, this is a pretty positive report. I note Councillor King's concerns, but with the answers to Councillor King's questions about the activities of Destination Albury-Wodonga, I'm comfortable where we're at the moment.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor King, do you wish to speak for?
Yeah, I'll speak for. I think we need to address those declines because it is a significant amount of money that we might be losing if indeed we can treat the report as factual. Albury-Wodonga is a regional capital city. It is a destination that people come to for sporting events, for their club events, for their visiting their people. We're trying to attract people to move here, and certainly I'm not talking the place down, and I would like to see a real positive and significant investment in the tourism. We have a wonderful area here. People would be envious, other local government authorities, both in Victoria and New South Wales and probably Australia-wide, are very envious, no doubt, of what we've got with the natural assets of the snowfields and Lake Hume and the Murray River. And I just encourage certainly the powers in the Albury City Council that manage the tourism to really focus on it and try and maintain those figures and ensure that that we have a thriving tourism economy, and we present ourselves in the best possible light.
Thank you, Councillor King. There have been no further speakers. I just might mention that it's well documented, Ms Squire, that I have difficulty with these metrics and have since 2012 when I joined council, because when you want them to speak for you, they're useful, but when you don't want them to speak for you, they're not useful in this case. But I think the metrics can be skewed, but it's the only peak body available for us to obtain the information, so we are wedded to that information. But I might say that from a Ramjo perspective and certainly from an opportunity perspective with the current developments in the Murray River precinct, so from here to Tocumwal and beyond, we have a great opportunity to make the Murray region a significant showcase for international tourism and our visitor economy. So I think with the developments at Wonga Wetlands, into Yamara Trail and the current developments in the Norriel Foreshore and the Gateway Island opportunities with Wodonga through 2 Cities One Community, I think we're in a good position to actually increase these metrics. We'll be concerned if we do all that with Mixquire and they don't improve, but we can't control what international tourists do, and I think your logic is quite reasoned when it can be said that a lot of our international tourists are backpackers. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Delegates' reports for noting. We have none. Notice of urgent business. Do we have any notice of urgent business? Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The notice of urgent business would form a part of what Councillor Cameron was requesting urgently before, which was a report on the feasibility of introducing bonds for people that to make sure that they adhere to any development conditions of consent.
Councillor Con.
More than happy to second that, noting with condolences to the gallery members that won't benefit from this new approach.
They did raise it. That's positive. Mr Zachnich? Didn't want to speak for it? No, are you comfortable with providing that report?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm happy to put that particular motion that is in urgent business. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. So we now have to move into confidential for our 2 confidential items. Councillor Vandervan.
I move that we move into confidential, exclusive of press or public on the grounds that 2, the matters and information are the following. A, personnel matters concerning particular individuals other than councillors, Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A, 2A.
And 17.2.
And confidential item exclusive of press or public on the grounds that 2, the matters and information are the following. D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, 1, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it. Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A, 2D-1, I think. Or I.
Aye. Yeah, thank you. D to I.
Aye, it is.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, second that.
If there's anyone have any statements or submissions from the public regarding reason to be identified in these confidential items 17.1 and 17.2, no.
we live?
Thank you, councillors. We're now back in live council, ordinary council, and I just wish to recommit the motions discussed during confidential. CM 17.1, the organisation review update, moved by Councillor David Thurley, seconded by Councillor Graham Doxey. The Council A, receive and note the report on the organisation review update. B, endorse the revised functional groupings, service model clusters within the adopted organisation structure detailed in attachment 2. C, commence the revised service model clusters from the 1st of October 2019. And D, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to take all necessary action to give effect to the revised service model clusters as endorsed. The motion was put and carried. The second motion, 17.2, deed of call option Nexus Industrial Precinct land sale, moved by Councillor Cameron, seconded by Councillor Thurley. The Council A, endorse option 1 as outlined in this report. B, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to finalise negotiations and arrangements for the sale of the land. And C, authorise its seal to be fixed to land transfer documents and any other documents deemed necessary to complete the sale and settlement of land identified in the Certificate of Title Folio Identifier 31/11211146, 32/11211146, 11/247805 and 12/247805 within the Nexus Industrial Precinct, in the presence of 2 signatories authorised to fix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 Local Government Act, Regulation 2005 and the Council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. That motion was put and carried. That is the completion of business. It is closed.